Hi, Dr. Rojas. How are you?
Well, hello, Dr. Fink.
I'm glad to meet you virtually. I was looking forward to your talk today. We were two ships passing in the night when I was joining the faculty and you were just moving on to your newest ventures.
Yeah, I hate that we didn't get to work together a little bit.
I know. Yes, well, there's still maybe potential in the future or something, but
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, I'm looking forward to your talk today. I'll give everybody a couple more minutes to join and I'll introduce you. I've been given the
Hey,
app today.
it's been exciting to hear about some of the programs you're developing there.
Good, good. Yeah, we're pretty excited about it too. And we have a couple also database repositories that we've generated both for the CARES program and for the transplant behavioral health that we're doing. So lots of opportunity for research and things too.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hey, Lenore.
Hey, how you doing, Dr. Rojas?
Yeah, it's good to see you.
I know you want me to call you Julio.
Yeah. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I know I'm always thanking you, but I thank you so much for everything you've done for me in my career. Thank you again.
Well, it was a privilege, and I sure miss being there with you on the floor.
I miss having you here too.
Yeah. I don't miss faculty meetings or any of that other stuff, but
I just feel like I learned a lot from you and you taught me how to learn. So I appreciate you so much.
well, thank you.
How to learn about this field for sure. It has been such a reward.
Yeah. Do you know if anybody's still doing the substance abuse stuff at OU Goddard?
You know what? I don't have any contact with them.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing.
I know Jackie Jordan was doing it last, but she retired.
I don't know what they're doing. I have enough going on here. I don't even have time to think about that.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's a couple minutes after 2, so I think I can go ahead and introduce you, Dr. Rojas. We are very privileged today to have Dr. Julio Rojas join us. He served on the faculty of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences from 2005 to 2021. And he was an associate professor and the director of ExecuCare, which was an outpatient program designed to evaluate and treat distressed, impaired healthcare professionals and executives. And his dedication to advancing the understanding of addiction has earned him recognition from residents, fellows, faculty, and professional organizations. His work has focused on treatment and training issues related to addictive disorders, psychiatric comorbidity, and trauma. And he's consulted on a number of new addiction treatment programs in Oklahoma over the past several years. His last major project was serving as the clinical committee chair that provided the clinical DNA for the Integris Arcadia Trails Center for Addiction Recovery that opened in May 2019 in Edmond. And then Dr. Rojas is also past president of the Oklahoma Psychological Association and past chair of the Colleague Assistance Program for OPA. From 2014 to 16, he served on the American Psychological Association's Advisory Committee for Colleague Assistance. And Dr. Rojas also contributed to Killing the Pain, the Epidemic, which was the first educational video series about opioid addiction epidemic in Oklahoma. He also served as an expert witness in the historic state of Oklahoma versus Johnson & Johnson opioid trial in May of 2019. Dr. Rojas earned his doctoral degree from the University of Georgia and completed his internship training at the Malcolm Randall VA Medical Center in Gainesville, Florida. He completed his postdoctoral training in clinical psychology with an emphasis in chemical dependency here at OUHSC. In 2020, he received a College of Education Alumni Award Mid-Career Practitioner from the University of Georgia for his work in addictions. And he's currently in part-time private practice in Edmond and enjoys being Wheelo to his 3 grandchildren, Maverick, Ellie, and Gentry. And so we're very privileged today to have Dr. Rojas join us, and I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Rojas.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Fink. Welo is short for abuelo, so that's my most favorite title that I get to enjoy now. And within a few hours, this place will liven up considerably, all of them under 6 years of age. So it's been nice to be able to spend time with them and just be Welo. So, but before that, I need to do this lecture. So let me do screen share. All right. Well, it is a delight to be back. It's a little bit like homecoming. I grew up on the Health Sciences Center campus, obviously 16 years, and doing this every Friday for a decade and a half. You get to real close with people, and you get to see their development and sort of their maturation. And so it's been exciting for me to be a part of that, and good to see a few of you online here today. So what I thought I'd talk about today is a little blend of some MI, but really my experiences over the years and what I've learned that has allowed me to be helpful with patients. Addiction, substance use disorders is really a disease of demoralization. And, for our patients, they are baffled, dumbfounded. My patients are physicians, pharmacists, dentists, and they really struggle with the why and how did this come to be. And so it's really important that we, educate and we support and we help them sort of in this journey of trying to recover. But, no matter how long we do this, we need to remember that this is an illness of demoralization. For some of our folks, this is the one area of their life where their brain is just not working as well as it has in other parts of their lives. And that can be really terrifying and confusing for folks. And I know some of you know that from personal lived experience. But anyway, strategies for increasing motivation and self-efficacy in patients with substance use disorders. And there's some things we can do. There's some things we can remind patients of, in their journey. One of these is going to advance. Well, first of all, are you seeing this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not seeing a presentation view, just your screen view.
How about that?
Perfect.
There have been times I've been 20 minutes into the talk and somebody say, well, we can't see the slides. Okay, so you can see the slides now. All right, so no disclosures. And so really what I want to talk about today it's helped me over my career to talk about the addictive process. There was a relational process. It's something I think we can all relate to. Certainly my patients have found it helpful in thinking through this as a relationship. They describe it as a relationship. So I like to use that and talk about these relational aspects and phases. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about MI and then really some, just strategies and things to motivate. And Dr. Fink, this won't be a pure MI. This will be a corrupted version of me doing this over the years. And like all clinicians, we fit these theories and models to our personality and our style. And there's a strong therapeutic effect a lot of times with these theories. So, all right. So obviously this is the and it controls our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors and our capacity for relationships. It's allowing me to do this talk. It's allowing you to learn from this talk. But if we take a step back, this thing values certain things, right? We value regulation, we value control, we value restraint. You guys want me to do a good talk, be mindful of your time, manage my anxiety, you want me to do all that stuff. And so at the end of the day, we have a set of expectations and values and things that we sort of insist upon, right? And so that we bring that bias into working with an illness that, by nature of the changes in a person's brain, they begin to lose all of these things. And so for those of us that don't know this from a personal recovery journey or don't know this condition well enough, we might forget, we get angry because patients may not remember. We get upset that they don't follow through. We get upset that they're demotivated. And I think a lot of times it's because we're coming at it from the perspective of this place where we have an expectation that folks act a certain way and do a certain thing. And I think it's important, part of our own self-reflection in this work is to be able to remind ourselves that this kind of can creep into our countertransference with patients if we're not careful. The reason they say and do some of the things they say and do is that this is an illness of the brain and it does some certain things. It has certain symptoms, and we know those symptoms intellectually, but I think sometimes emotionally we can be at a bad place and make comments and speak to our patients in ways that are not helpful. So I want you to know this is our starting place, and because of that, we can get ourselves in trouble. Now let's look at the definition from ASAM, and we're just going to focus on the red highlighted part, right? Diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behaviors, interpersonal relationship, and dysfunctional emotional response. So there's the definition, and we're not going to read the whole definition, but I want you to look at that and then compare it to the slide that we just showed you, where we have certain expectations about patients and their behaviors and what they do and what they say, and showing up on time and labeling their emotions and being able to kind of show restraint and being able to use the tools that we're trying to teach them, right? That's what we want. And then compare that to this definition of some of the challenges that our folks have when they sit with us, when they try to work with us. And if we're not mindful of this diminished capacity and the ways in which these things work, we might become a little more frustrated or say things that are not helpful. So I think it's always good to refresh our memory about what is the nature of the illness that we're treating. And for somebody, that might mean going to open meetings of NA or AA and just sitting in those rooms and listening to the nature of this thing and the way it affects thinking and the way it affects emotional function and behaviors and relationships, and try to really get your head around what this condition is and what it is we're trying to do in helping folks. All right, so I like to talk about addiction in these three parts, and my patients can certainly relate to this three-part story. And the first part is sort of this initiation and honeymoon phase. And unfortunately, this introduces the idea that the substance or substances is the solution to the individual's problem. And so, for some people, this is a transformative sort of experience. For the first time, they feel a way about themselves, a way about the body, a way about their experience on this earth that they've never felt, ever. And substances sort of do that. And those of us old enough, we remember back in the day when we were talking about presynaptic, postsynaptic, and the terminal buttons and the synaptic cleft and the dopamine. And I remember going to weekend conferences about dopamine, right? And this very siloed view of addiction. And so now we certainly understand that it's systems and subsystems that are affected. Our understanding of it is much more complex. But for our patients, they will all tell you about the moment they initiated their relationship with substance and something transformative happened. And I mean transformative in a psychosocial, spiritual, emotional sense that, we used to think that the changes were after the initiation of substance abuse, and Nora Valco has sort of done a lot of work to help us understand that these changes may be pre-initiation of substance abuse, and that causes the susceptibility, the very fact that the natural things that are offered in life don't stimulate a person to feel a sense of pleasure or euphoria makes it so that they have to go out and seek riskier sorts of things. And so I have yet in 30 years of listening to patient stories, hear a patient tell me that they grew up feeling rooted, connected, loved, nurtured, and that when they drank a beer, it changed their lives. I've never heard that story. Maybe some of you have, maybe some of you haven't, but I certainly have heard story after story of feeling less than, inadequate, not quite, this and that, too small, too tall. And upon initiation of substances, their life, their experience of life, and their experience of themselves transformed. And I think this is the sort of initial honeymoon experience that sets some folks up for a walk with the addictive process. So here's one of my patient stories talking about her first hydrocodone. So if you read that, you know, those of you that ever taken hydrocodone, I'm so thankful I have a normal reaction. I get sleepy, groggy, I get sick, I have to lather on the Phenergan just to get it on, or just to get the medicine in me. And, you know, consequently, most of us will take 3 of 10 or 3 of 20 or 5 of 20 pills, and we're done with that, right? But look at my patient's description of her first hydrocodone. And, you know, when you read this, you get the sense of this dopamine deficit, the state of dis-ease, and that for the first time through the initiation of this hydrocodone, they feel normal, they feel better than normal. And, you know, for those of you that struggle to understand or maybe judge that, you know, that she wanted this or she chose this, I want you to, she had no way of predicting the response she would have to that hydrocodone. Absolutely none, right? This response was not under her conscious control to have, and yet she had it. And it marked her, right? You can see the description, right? She had found something, she had discovered something that had fundamentally transformed her perception of self, her belief in her abilities. And we all know how this is going to end, right? When you have that kind of experience with a substance. Once I read Nora Valco had this with while she was hospitalized, she had this with a major opioid, not hydrocodone, but she had the experience with a major opioid, and it frightened her, it shook her, and so she discontinued it because of that. So, so this honeymoon initiation is important because I think it begins to set the person down that path, and we know genetics factor in, we know a lot of other things factor in, but so then I was like, somebody said, well, why didn't you just stop? So we just read her description, and we say helpful stuff like, well, why didn't you just stop? Raise your hand if you've ever ended a relationship in the honeymoon phase. Raise your hand if you've ever met someone who was, you know, who brought this joy and happiness, and you decided you would end that relationship immediately. Folks, we don't do that. We play it out. We're going to see where it goes, right? And so for her, obviously, it's what she began to do is to begin to learn about the drug, the effects of the drug, how much of the drug, you know, how much could she take, how much could she do, what substances you could mix it with, right? Now, in this phase, what begins to happen is that the addictive process is affecting her whether the drugs are in her body or not, right? So now she begins to mentally obsess about the drug. She begins to have salience for the positive. You know, she's learning dose, amount, number of pills. Ultimately, she's going to learn to do things like divert medicines from the hospital, divert medicines from the patients, and she's going to have any number of rationalizations for doing that. She's tired, she came in sick, she deserves it. And this is where I think we don't do enough in treatment to really talk through this with patients. We sort of want them coming in saying they're done and they've seen the light and we want them to get better. But this is sort of the unspoken and I think key parts of what sustains that addictive thinking, because unchallenged, unspoken, unaddressed, I think it just sort of stays there and lingers and sets them back up for that addictive thinking later on. And so for those of you that are new to this, you really need to encourage patients to talk about, for sure, don't say unhelpful things like, can't you see your relationship with the substance is the problem? Because I promise you, at this phase, this relationship is the solution to the person's life, not the problem. And so when we say helpful stuff like that, they know we don't get it. They know we don't understand. And so I think in treatment, my experience in treatment a lot of times is we've not done a good job encouraging folks to talk about, what is it about this substance? What is it about how it makes you feel? To talk about the relationship they built and the kinds of things they sacrificed or decisions they made to pursue the relationship with this substance. And so hopefully none of you are saying things like that the substance is the problem, because for them it's not, it's the solution, even when there's ample evidence that there's a problem. Sometimes you'll see this, you realize the nature of this illness when a patient can be hospitalized 6 times in 18 months for alcoholism, but in their mind, they cannot make that connection. It's always something else, right? And then they get a little bit of sober time and they say, I realized that drinking was killing me, right? You have to get some sobriety, you have to get some space, you have to get some education to begin to put these pieces together. What seems so obvious to us as clinicians is very muddled for our patients, and they can't always connect these dots. So now, how long that, one of the things about opioids is it really collapses the relationship time period, right? So think about someone using alcohol, that could be a decade or more before you start having real significant consequences with opioids, pain medicines. I mean, I've seen people in trouble in months, right? So there's no long, it's not like a pot, you might have a relationship over a long period of time. Even some people with cocaine can have that over several years. Opioids has really collapsed that window, and we see folks in trouble in under 6 months, certainly in under a year with this. And so it's been a game changer in that way. All right. So now, they've spent, however long in this second phase, really getting to understand and know and figure out the ins and out of this addictive process and how much and how often. And by now you're going from hydrocodone to, oxycodone, and you're sort of making that trip upwards because it's hedonistic that way. It takes more, and pretty soon you're out there chasing down fentanyl. So there will come a time where it becomes clear to the individual that the relationship with substances is doing more to them than for them. And this is a real tipping point that opens up sometimes the opportunity, whether it's in an ER or a jail cell or, in a detox, it really opens the window of opportunity to introduce the idea of something different, treatment. And, what I love about MI is in the old days, now I'm going back to the 90s of drug rehab where clinicians had names like Dragon Lady and Angry Bob. I mean, those were the clinicians, right? We're a little better today, but, in the old days, there was sort of this much more confrontational style, you're going to die, pick a plot at the cemetery, those kinds of interventions. And so I think today we're a lot better about, encouraging folks and talking to them or with them rather than to them or at them. But one thing I really like to do when they're in this sort of window is really talk about the painful, vicious nature of this cycle. And in MI language, that would be increasing subjective distress. And I think patients know that, they're living that. And I think when they hear someone say that, it resonates for them. It resonates for them that it is a vicious and painful cycle at this point. It's not fun. There's no euphoria. It's, at this point, she was stealing from patients, stealing from the hospital, feeling wretched, didn't feel good as a nurse, a mother, the list was long. And we know where she's at. She's in that pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization that it talks about in the literature of the big book. And so And so this is a window, and we have to be real careful about how we talk within this window and what we offer within this window. And, for our patients, they are exquisitely sensitive to shaming remarks and blaming remarks. And we have to be very skilled at navigating this and offering hope and offering options. And we'll talk about a menu of options. But also understanding that it's their decision, and they have to make the decision. And that's that idea of responsibility for change. That's one of the other things in MI that's talked about a lot. Okay, so I wanted to give you this sort of three-part love story so that you can see that for patients it helps them. And for some of you, maybe you're in a bad relationship, have been, or in one now, and you understand the agony, the ambivalence about staying, going, what you're getting out of it, what you're not getting out of it. We know what it is to be stuck sometimes in bad relationships or a bad job. And so, making this more universal, I think, is helpful as clinicians if we can think about times where we've been stuck, where we didn't know, where we seemingly were making poor decisions, even with a wealth of information that we needed to change our behavior or circumstance. Okay. So, if you look at the DSM and you line it up, right, you can see that over, just in slices of this thing, first to go is control, then one's social instincts, being where you're supposed to be, taking care of the people you're supposed to take care of, being a good teammate, team member, and then ultimately the self-preservation instinct, going out and looking for fentanyl, having fentanyl as a drug of choice, wondering about how to get car fentanyl. All these things are the insanity of the addictive process. For a lot of our folks, they go out looking for fentanyl, which could result in death. But if they plunged into a car in a lake, they try desperately to survive. So it's the insanity of the illness that they're putting themselves in high-risk situations to maintain their relationship. So, and of course, we've seen this where, the addictive instinct will override any instinct. And, this is where I tell families, you're upset because they're lying, you're upset because they're not taking care of things. But at this point, the physician has abandoned the Hippocratic Oath. And I mean, this is just about the relationship, the addictive process. And so we those of us that don't understand this illness, we're perplexed by this, right? But this is the only place it could end, that the addictive instinct overrides every other instinct is the only place it could end if you understand the nature of addiction, right? And so, so for our patients, this is a very scary place because in no other area of their life have they found themselves to have such a loss of control. And okay, so I know that a lot of times we like to read current and we like to read what's coming out, but folks, I'm going to tell you, it's important you go back. You go back to folks like Vernon Johnson, who, these were the pioneers of the alcoholism treatment movement, and look at what he wrote. If you've never read this book, do yourself a favor and read this book. But he writes about alcoholics evade, deny outright the need for help. It must be remembered they're not in touch with reality, but even in their sickest, they are capable of accepting some useful portion of reality if that reality is presented in forms they can receive. Now, a few of us on this lecture today understand what is that form they can receive. Well, one of the most effective things I've found is to put them in touch with somebody who can talk to them about their journey, who can tell them their recovery story. So this might look like a 12-step call. That is something that is presented in the form they can receive, much like the story of Bill and Bob, right? Hearing the story of another was a form that Bob could receive. He'll hear and Bill tell his story, right? But for us clinicians, there is a way to present what we have to offer in a way that can be received. And so I want to talk about that today. But if you've not read this, you need to go back and read this because it's really a good, it really walks you through the nature of this illness. And, a lot of folks getting into addiction today, I don't think understand the nature of it. Outside of the DSM-5 and outside of maybe sitting with patients, it has a nature. It sounds a certain way, when you're in the presence of it, and you really have to understand that, I think, to be effective. Okay, so a form they can receive. So a form they can receive, I found to be motivational interviewing. And I came up through the hard school. It was confrontation. It was the hot seat in the middle of the room and 20 people sitting around you in a circle and just firing away about your character defects. And, the idea was let's bust them up and build them up. Well, I'm sure you all know from sitting with folks that by the time we get them, they're pretty busted up. They're shame-ridden, guilt-ridden. They feel wretched, broken, unsalvageable. So I was thankful to see this transition and this more affirming and humanistic sort of approach to it. And it's hard to find anybody now that's not familiar with MI, but it is patient-centered. And I think one of the negative raps that humanistic schools of psychotherapy get is that it's lazy therapy. I can almost hear my major professor calling humanistic therapy lazy therapy because you just sit there and you nod and you affirm the patient, and it's just so not true. And MI is very directive, and it really gets at, I think, the important part of this. A lot of us grew up thinking about the word resistance, and they're resistant to change, they're resistant to going to meetings, they're resistant to going to taking their psychiatric meds. And really, one of the nice things with MI has been this moving towards more of an ambivalence, because we all have ambivalence. When I left OUHSC, I had a lot of ambivalence about that, right? I did not do that lightly after 16 years. So ambivalence is universal. We all have it, and our patients have it. And just because we don't understand why they have ambivalence about a relationship with hydrocodone, that doesn't mean we have ambivalence about things they don't understand. And so I think that shift to looking at this as more universal, all people struggle with ambivalent, mixed feelings, mixed thoughts and feelings about something that must change or needs to change. And so that's been in my career, that's been a really helpful way for me to get away from my original teachings, which was this idea of, well, you're resistant. I think that gives us permission not to work hard. I think it gives us permission not to engage and give up on patients when I told you earlier, they got a condition that affects every facet of their experience, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and relationships. And so I think even the word resistance has been a disservice to how we've worked with folks with substance use disorders. So anyway, the 5 techniques, there they are. Empathy, developing a discrepancy, that's from the cognitive dissonance, Festinger writings, avoiding argumentation. They do it better than we do it. And really what I always strive to do with patients is support their self-efficacy. I had a young man whose mother died and he relapsed. And he went back out for a day and he immediately called his sober living and he immediately went back to treatment. And he was just dejected, right? He was beating on himself. He had disappointed his mom who had passed. He had disappointed himself. And, I said, listen, fella, you went out for one day, called you sober living, got back in treatment. You're there now. You're sober today, right? Just, forward. But because from his mind, he had failed. But what he failed to see was that treatment had worked. Treatment had taught him and showed him some things. It showed him the nature of this illness, the progressive nature of it. it did not allow him to get into any denial that he was going to do this successfully for another 10 years. He got back immediately, right? And so, helping him see that, showing him that he made the right call, having had the lapse, he made the right call, and things were going to get better because of that. And it's hard for our patients because they're so geared to lock in on the bad and the negative that he failed to see that he had benefited from treatment. He had done the things we would want him to do, because it's an incurable condition and he'll face this for the rest of his life. So I really like some of these techniques and just the spirit of MI and the way that we sit with patients and honor them and collaborate with them versus talking at them and scaring them and saying helpful stuff like you're going to die. And okay, so ambivalence, we all have it. We all, my patients talk about the devil and the angel. My Native American patients talk about the two wolves, and which one lives is the one you feed. In fact, I was joking with one of my patients the other day, and I said, we got to keep that negative bad wolf to just morsels of meat, no full suppers. And that's something he can understand and wrap his head around. And because this struggle of ambivalence is a human universal struggle, we all have it. And he feels, it's normalizing this, that their struggle is a struggle with this substance, but we all have struggles with our substances or our things, whatever they might be. And, one of the things I've always found helpful was to ask patients what drugs do for them, not why they use them, but, what is it about that relationship for them? And they'll be glad to tell you. And, a lot of times counselors will say, well, you're glamorizing. And no, it's just folks listening to yourself talk about your relationship with someone, something is an important part of the process of changing. You have to hear this stuff and be able to label and name some things to begin to have a better understanding. All right, so, these are some questions I like to ask patients. I slipped in a little interpersonal psychotherapy here on the end, asking them in what ways they might perceive you're helping them. Because I think we are part of the medicine, right? We are, the things that we bring, our personalities, our education, our experience. I mean, we're part of what happens in that room to help the patient change. And those of us that have credibility, however we may have gotten it, that's really important. You want to sit with folks who you think know, understand, and have a chance of helping you. And our folks figured out very quickly whether you're credible or not. I remember early on, a lot of times I'd get the question, well, are you in recovery? That was an early on question. I don't even get that question anymore because, your patients very quickly begin to understand whether you have the skill set, whether you sound and act in a way that gives them some hope that you're going to help them get better. And so, but self-efficacy, I think, has been a big one in helping folks see that there have been times they've been able to cut back, go from 5 substances to 2 substances. Now, that idea of going from 5 to 2 is just might be intolerable to the total abstinence folks, but it is a victory to go from 5 drugs to 2 drugs. And I think one of the things that I've appreciated is this move from, hey, if you can't get totally abstinent, then maybe going from 5 to 2 drugs is good, right? It's all progress. It's all building on itself. It's all helping the patient believe in their abilities of being able to do it 1 drug at a time, all drugs at a time. Some of our folks have been able to abstain for periods. Some of our folks relapse around anniversaries. But when you're in that trench and you're in that fight, it's hard to appreciate in what ways you've been successful because it all feels like failure. And, our job is to remind folks and to elicit from them stories from when they were able to do some things and help them understand what things they were doing at that period of their life that might have been helping. And so, again, if we're treating a disease of demoralization, right, one of the things we can do is help patients remember and recollect times they've been successful. All right, I like frames. I think whether you have 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or 50 minutes with the patients, you can, so one of the things I like to do with the person early on, if they're drinking, is kind of have them read this, ask if they'd be willing and sort of read this handout on rethinking your drinking. And so, from this frames idea, we give personal feedback about, for those of us that are physicians or work with labs, we might give feedback on elevated liver function tests. Those personal feedback, responsibility for change. I always say to a person, you can change this, right? This is, and that's very different than you need to change this. You need to put the plug in the jug, right? You need to, this is only they can do this. And certainly, I think we give advice, and I always tell them you can do A, B, and C. Right. And in that list, folks, there's the option to do nothing, right? Do nothing, you can do this, we can do this. And we should always, the more options we put out there, the more likely it is they're gonna take us up with something. Not everybody's gonna go right to residential treatment right out of the gate, right? There might be some other things, and that's okay. And so there's expressing empathy, obviously. And I think as you learn more about this illness, as you understand this illness, I think it's easier to sort of be empathic because you appreciate what they're, the very organ that we're trying to treat is the very organ with the illness. I think other providers, the cardiologists and some of the other folks, they have their patients struggle as well, but hopefully the brain still at a place where they can partner with the patients. But ours is real tricky because the very organ we need working well is the one that's in an unwell state. And still we expect them to show up, do the homework and all the other things. So it's important, I think, sometimes to check ourselves that the folks we're working with have real limitations around some of the, I still remember some of the early assignments when people would get to rehab, right? Read the first 164 pages of the big book and answer these 10 questions. Man, at 3 weeks sober, they can't figure out where to go have breakfast, but these are the interventions we were doing, right? So anyway, sometimes it's important to step back and kind of think about what you're doing. And those of you that run programs, think about your programs and the kinds of interventions. I like these readiness rulers. If you've never seen the tip 35, you should get it. Now, I don't actually, have a ruler. Sometimes you might have this on a 8.5 by 11 copy, but I think it's important for our patients to learn about scaling things. So scaling confidence, scaling importance, scaling urges and cravings. For a lot of our folks, there's, it's the extremes, right? It's either all or none. And I think an important lesson in this journey is to learn about scaling. Not everything's a 10, not everything's a 0, and there's a vast number in between, and sort of teaching them that, teaching them about their anger, teaching them about their cravings, and helping patients understand that maybe they can handle a craving of 2 or 3, but certainly ones around 8 or 9, they might need other skill sets, they might need other sorts of things for that. For some of our patients, MAT has been an important tool in the treatment of their substance use disorder. And I think for a lot of patients, just understanding that for a lot of our patients, emotional factors put them at a 10. For some of our patients, visual things put them at a 10. And just helping them sort of begin to understand that there are times they're triggered and they navigate these successfully. There are times they're triggered and sometimes they don't, and what's sort of going on differently in those. So these tools, I think, open up to have a conversation and allows you to have some discovery for what's going on with patients. And you learn things you might not have otherwise learned, because a lot of times our patients find it hard to talk about certain things. And so sometimes having a tool or something opens it up and allows them to speak more freely and sort of structures it a little better than asking that dreaded question, well, how are you feeling today? All right, so here's the decisional balance, and I'm supposed to be able to draw on this thing, but and I'm running out of time. I have something at 3, so I'll have to get off, but my glasses on here. Draw. So if you've used these, I used this just a week ago with a colleague of mine who's having some career challenges, but I use these all the time for big decisions and stuff. But, you know, a lot of times what we do is we focus a lot on this benefit of making change and the cons of not changing. That's what we as clinicians, we like to fill those boxes. But I'm going to tell you something. I learned more from patients talking about these, right? What's the downside of this change? You know, what's the downside of discontinuing your relationship with hydrocodone, right? What's the upside of not changing? What's the upside of continuing that? This is sort of the unspoken stuff. I think that this is where the more insane sort of thought process is going on, and it's important for the patient to talk about it and talk it through and talk it out and just listen to them, because it's fascinating what tends to come out of this box. But as clinicians, we love to hear things coming out of those upsides of change and those downsides of not changing. But our patients have learned that's the stuff we love, and they're happy to tell you about it. We really ought to encourage them to be honest, rigorously honest, the literature says, about some of that stuff, the downsides to making the change and the upside to staying the same, because there is an upside, you know, and they need to hear it and sort of talk about that. And we could do a whole hour talk on this decisional balance worksheet, but read about it, and actually what you really ought to do is do some on your own, do some for yourself. And as you begin to learn and fill them out for yourself, I think it's a little easier to do with patients. If any of the residents are on this call, on this Zoom session, they've heard me say you got to use these tools for yourself, I think, to really have a command for them. All right. Now I'm stuck, so I don't know if I have to turn it off. Looks like I'm losing my voice here. I'm out of the habit of lecturing, Dr. Fink. That's what happens. And you don't lecture, and then you can't even do a 1 hour lecture because you don't have the vocal stamina. Kind of stuck here now. I can't forward, having had these drawings on here. And I don't have any. See if I can page down. No, can't do that. All right, open to suggestions on kind of stuck here.
Can you page to the right or hit return?
Hitting right, hitting that. Page up, page down. It's like once I started writing on this, it popped up on. Let me hit escape. That worked. Let me just go one down and pick back, see if that'll work.
Oh, good.
Oh, and the drawings following me. Or following into the next slide. Well, come on.
I can't wait to tell Dr. Brand this. No,
Is there any way you can
You
erase
say,
it?
Rojas was like a postdoctoral rookie. He's a postdoctoral rookie up there. He's just fumbling. Well, listen, for those of you OCPD types, I'm going to just keep going slide by slide, and you're going to have to deal with that, with those drawings there of the circle, and that'll be fun.
Good exposure. Good
Hear about
exposure.
stages of change. And, all right, Kelsey, mute yourself because I got to keep going. I can't get distracted.
Okay, sorry.
Stages of change. So, you know, this is about readiness to change. Obviously, you hear them interchange, but stages of change is really about readiness to change. And I like it. I like this image to the left because, you know, in an upward ascending spiral with a little bit of a slant, you know, the journey of recovery is really a progress and some backslide and a progress and some backslide. And that's the normal sort of trajectory. And it's important patients understand that this is a chronic incurable illness, and we all will backslide. Some of you started a diet or weight loss program in January, and you abandoned it by March. It's human. That's what we do. I'm going to pick up the pace real quick. This is what, you know, when I sit with someone for the first time, this is what I imagine. They have all these things going on. Some of it they get pain. Some of it they don't have a name for. They're hurting. They're sitting in this chair for their 15th interview, maybe over the course of their life. They have very little hope anything's going to happen. and very little hope they're going to hear anything positive. But you know what? They show up anyway. They show up anyway. And I admire just that, you know, that after 20 years of trying to get this thing figured out, they still show up and they're still wanting help. And if I can hold that in my head, then I'm bringing my A game to this, because I want them to hear something that will encourage and inspire them. And folks, when you look at stages of change, when you look at MI, when you look at frames, and then when you begin to think about the comorbidities our patients have, there's an incredible menu of options for our patients, right? There's any number of things that they can do, little baby steps to improve their overall health and wellness. And I just want them to be curious about one of those things. You know, in the old days, we used to say, first things first, you got to get sober. And if you're sober for a year, then we'll figure out if major depression, then we'll figure out if you have PTSD. We used to say that 1 year. And then when they go back out, we'd say, well, they didn't want it. No, maybe it's difficult to live with major depression for a year sober, which was the solution. And that was just agonizing, right? Maybe we got to learn to do some other things. And I know the VA has changed some ways in which they do this, about requiring sobriety to get services in other sections of the VA. And I think that was smart. It's consistent with what we know. Sometimes you got to start through that trauma lens to get to the, you know, pieces related to the, you know, Lisa Najovitz and I think Connie Hine. I mean, they would say that they, starting through that trauma treatment perspective, results in some of the gains that they were looking to have, them and their patients, on the substance abuse side. So when you look at the menu of options that when you sit with a person you can have, it's any number of things that we should be able to offer to folks, and hopefully they'll get curious about one of these things. And more recent, it's been MAP treatment, and I think a lot of folks have really benefited from that. So that seemed to go really fast, and I hope that those circles and those squares on the screen haven't been terribly distressing towards you. I know some of you, it's like you've just had to sign off because you can't tolerate that, but it's Friday, so we should be flexible. All right, so conclusions. Patients with SUD are ambivalent about their relationship. They're not resistant, and ambivalence is universal. And think about your own life where you've been ambivalent about stuff. Folks, we say this, but I think sometimes we really don't grasp it. Addiction changes brain structure and function in a predictable way. It has a predictable course. It does certain things. Vernon Johnson wrote about it. We see it. And these are symptoms of the illness. And when we get mad because we see symptoms of the illness, that's our countertransference. We really need to talk about that and get supervision about that, because it's a function of where they're at in the disease process. The therapeutic relationship you have with your patients can be leveraged over time. I miss working with Dr. Tucker. She would work with her patients over time, and she'd tee them up to go see Rojas, right? And it might take 2 years, but she'd finally get them where they'd be willing to come just next door to see me. And she did it so well with so many people, but she would leverage her relationship and say, you know, I got this guy here who can talk to you through this and understands it. And so, you know, even if you don't feel like you're the most competent with substance use disorders, you can still sort of begin to get a patient prepared and be willing to meet someone who is. And, you know, a lot of times in the field, we have a lot of folks working in this field with internalized stigma about addiction, and they don't even realize it. And so we know that sometimes that's just a part of feeling ineffective or feeling like you can't get through to folks who have substance use disorders. So, you know, hopefully with some education and mentoring and some attitudinal and behavioral shifts, and maybe doing the things that are proven to work, that'll give you a little more self-efficacy and sense of, you know, that you can be effective and be helpful. You have to be caring and competent, right? You can't just be caring and not know, you know, how to navigate. And I think, I mean, the reason I love working in addiction is it's challenging. Every patient is a case study, right? Every one of them is a case study in how to motivate and how to encourage and how to how to help the patient. So I'm going to stop there. We've got a few minutes. I know some of you have clinical obligations and stuff, but it's been a joy to kind of talk to y'all from the perspective of a guy on the back end of his career, and maybe reminding you of some things that are important to be thinking about. All right, Kelsey, you can laugh some more now.
Okay, good.
Tell
Thank
him,
you for
tell him,
presenting.
tell Brad he was like a postdoctoral rookie. He couldn't figure out what to do, and his voice went hoarse. And
Oh,
yeah,
I can't wait.
Dr. Brand will love that.
Very good. This was great, Dr. Rojas. It was a pleasure to meet you. Do we have any questions or comments, compliments for Dr. Rojas today from our group? Please feel free to unmute and just speak up.
I'll try to figure out if I can erase these while you're talking.
Hi, I'm Bella. I enjoyed the motivational interviewing part. I've done some trainings in that one myself, and there's a lot of reflective listening in the motivational interviewing part.
Yeah.
So it reminded me of some of the things. I work with the VA in intake, and I see a lot of veterans struggling with substance abuse. So it gives me an inside look to focus on what's working instead of what's not working.
Yeah.
Those periods that they've been sober,
Yeah.
and what brings them, what motivates them to come
Yeah.
to the clinic and get enrolled. And there's I can bet 90% with that ambivalence saying, I almost didn't make it to this session. I almost canceled the intake. And when you look at the chart, they have canceled the intake at least 3 times.
Yeah.
So just my meeting and eye contact up front is like, I'm happy to see you. You've made it on time.
Yeah.
This shows commitment.
Yeah. You know, we work in this field so long, we really don't appreciate how curative it can be to be seen and heard and validated. I mean, those are very powerful tools we have that, you know, when we do it for so long, we lose perspective on that, you know, for a lot of our veterans, they're not heard, they're not seen.
They're very anxious, and they'll say, I was very afraid of judgment and
Yeah.
ridicule. And I'll pull out of my behind the desk because I'm typing a lot. I'll pull out and visit a little bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll go with, what did you gain in that 1 year or a few months when you were sober? They'll be like, oh, my relationships were much better. What brings you now? Oh, I'm tired of the chaos. They can identify with the chaos.
Yeah.
Or with alcohol, they'll say, oh, I have grown up, I have kids, and I don't want the hangover feeling that I want to have more energy, and I realize I have more energy when I am sober.
Yeah.
But then they relapse so much.
Well, there's
But
the
we're reflecting on those days when they were sober, and it elates them like, oh, I felt more energy in those days.
You know, Bill Wilson talked about the characteristic hallmark of alcoholism is once the individual gets everything peaceful, the job, the dog, the cat, everybody's happy and there's harmony, the response is to take a torch to all of that and go back out and drink. That is the insanity of getting to that place and then seeing it all sort of torched to the ground, because that's the insane nature of addiction. And so I've got a guy who's learned he doesn't pat himself on the back, he doesn't accept accolades, because in his mind that translates into, I'm going to get drunk. So he tells everybody, I'm just sober 24 hours. I don't want to hear anybody talking about congrats or attaboy, because that'll get me drunk quicker than anything. And so he's had to learn that for him, that he goes to a bad place when he gets those attaboy. That's him. That's his story. That's his journey. But it took him a few years to figure that out. Well, folks, I have a commitment at 3:00 to get ready for my grandbabies, but I certainly have enjoyed my time with you all, and I've enjoyed the talks that that I've been able to watch, and it's great to see the seminar still going on, Dr. Fink, and thank you for all the work you're pouring into that, because I know
Great,
you and
thank
Dr. Brand are doing a great job of it. So you too, Kelsey, you're doing a good job.
We couldn't do it
That's
without
right.
Kelsey,
Thank
that's
you.
for
Right.
sure.
You see how I'm affirming her and building her self-efficacy?
Yes, thank you all.
All
Thanks,
right, you
Dr.
guys have a
Rojas.
good- Hey, to all you moms, happy Mother's Day. Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Dr.
Dr.
Rojas.
Rojas. Take care. Bye-bye.
Right, bye.